Okay, so in the last screencast video lecture, I spoke about several things. The concept of use value, the concept of exchange value. I discussed the importance of understanding how to calculate surplus value. And I also suggested that um, understanding how to calculate surplus plus value is essential or indispensable to understanding the base superstructure relation. Marx's labor theory of value, also referred to as the surplus theory of value. And also, it helps us to understand how it is that a superstructure emerges from what Marx refers to as the base. Okay. And this is something that he theorizes emerges through the course of time. Okay. And it's important to understand that the superstructure emerges as a consequence of the immense, almost unimaginable amounts of surplus value that the bourgeoisie is able to harvest or extract, siphon off, if you will, from the labor power of the proletariat. And remember that for Marx, the main source of value in capitalist societies is the working class or the proletariat. Without them, you would not be able to generate use values, and you wouldn't be able to produce commodities and sell them for an exchange value for a price on the marketplace, right? So they're absolutely indispensable to the productive machinery, if you will, of capitalism that the bourgeoisie disproportionately benefits from, according to Marx. Okay, and by degrees, depending upon the situation we're talking about, they unjustly, benefit from the value that the proletariat, which is to say the majority of society, produces under capitalist societies and economies. So the base refers to two things: the sphere of production, where commodities are produced, and also it refers to the social relations of production, because as Marx looks at the sphere of production, observes it, studies it, analyzes it, tries to understand it, he understands that the sphere of production is structured by a social relation, which is to say this uneven uh, power dynamic that obtains between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. You see, I have a couple pictures here of the base, the sphere of production. Uh, you know, you have a chicken processing plant. You have an image on the far right corner of Foxconn, where MacBook computers like the one I'm using right now are produced in China. And then also you see here a picture in the lower right-hand side of the screen, a coltan mine. And coltan, many of you may or may not know that coltan is indispensable to the production of cell phones. It's mined predominantly in the Congo. And I just want to define the superstructure before I describe it in more detail in the following slide, and also the next screencast video lecture. So the superstructure refers to a set of social and political and legal institutions that emerge as a consequence of the activities in the base. So the base, in effect, produces the superstructure, and it produces the conditions for a superstructure to emerge. And for Marx, this is a process that takes place through the course of time. It's taken a long time for a superstructure to emerge. Okay, but by the time that he was writing, he was looking at the history of capitalist societies. He had a fairly developed and sophisticated superstructure had emerged that he took great effort and pains to analyze and understand its logics and its dynamics, the way it functions, and it consists of mass media during his time, the press. Today we refer to the news, television, radio, and also entertainment by degrees. Uh, the state is a very, very important aspect of the superstructure. The law, legislators are an important element of the superstructure. For instance, Congress here in the United States, which it consists of the Senate and uh, the House of Representatives, who all propose laws, debate laws, institute laws. So you have the military is a certain aspect of the superstructure. The police is an aspect of the superstructure. Lobbyists, people who benefit, people who lobby on the behalf of corporations in Washington D.C. To lawmakers, they would be considered an aspect of the superstructure. And Marx says some rather pithy and quite incisive things about the base superstructure relation in a contribution to the critique of political economy, written in 1859. I want to read out this particular section of it because I think there's a lot that here that if I comment on it in sufficient detail, then you'll start to be able to begin to envision how and why it is that a superstructure emerges from what Marx refers to as a base. I'm going to read it out to you. I'm going to make some comments, and I'm going to stop the video and then work on the second part of my discussion of the base superstructure relation. So Marx says in a contribution to critique of political economy, in the social production of their existence, men inevitably enter into definite relations which are independent of their will, namely the relations of production, appropriate to a given stage in the development of their material forces of production. Now, we don't have to worry too much about what he means by a stage in the development of the material forces of production. He's basically talking about how it is that capitalism and the forces of production, right? The infrastructure within the sphere of production, how and why that develops. Like new machines make things more efficient, make the whole process of production more streamlined and conducive to profit. That's what he means by development of the material forces of production. Obviously, the material forces of production right now in the early 21st century are much more sophisticated than they were during Marx's time. And he says that the totality of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society. And when Marx refers to the economic structure of society, he's basically referring to the base, the real foundation on which arises or emerges, if you will, a legal and political superstructure, and to which correspond definite forms of consciousness, or for our purposes, subjectivity. Remember the term or the concept subjectivity. It refers to consciousness. It refers to self-consciousness, the self, identity, all these things, right? And he says also that the mode of production of material life conditions the general process of social, political, and intellectual life. There's a lot that he's saying here. Okay, so first off, he talks about the social production of human existence. Okay, so the production of our existence, the production of these commodities that are behind me, the production of our food, the production of computers, the production of cell phones, of watches, of pens, you name it. The immense panoply, the cornucopia of commodities that are produced, right, that constitute our existence, right? In order for these things to be produced, in order for the social production of our existence to be produced, men and women, human beings, inevitably have to enter into definite relations, right? And for capitalism, these relations are what he refers to as the social relations of production, right? You have to work in order to live. You have to have money to pay for the necessities of life, food, shelter, what have you, right? And if you're born in the working class, like, you have to work. You have to work. This is independent of your will. Otherwise, you starve. You don't survive, right? And so, when men and women enter into the social relations of production, right? They're producing the stuff of our social existence, which is to say commodities, right? Uh, and they're producing these things in exchange for a wage, okay? And if you remember from the labor theory of value, that because the working class does not have capital, a great deal of money, economic wealth, they don't own land, companies, what have you. They have to, by virtue or by dint of economic necessity, enter into a relation with the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie says, I will pay you a wage, which is basically equal to the cost of subsistence, if you'll recall, right? In order for you to supply with me with your labor or labor power. The power to produce use values, right? Because we're entering into a contract, right? And you agree to rent out your labor power to me to produce use values, which is say commodities, right? In exchange for a wage. That's part of the deal, right? Uh, then the capitalist or the bourgeoisie, right, has the right to the use values, which is say the commodities that the working class produces. He has a legal right, right? Owns the commodities that the working class produce, right? He has a right to hang a price tag, which is say an exchange value on it, and then send it out to marketplace, right? After it sells on the marketplace, right? The capitalist or the bourgeoisie retains a surplus value, that it is enormous in comparison to what it is the bourgeoisie pays to the working class in the form of a wage, right? And so, what do they do with that surplus value? Those profits. They can do a lot of things. They can save it. They can invest in a lavish life for themselves. If they do invest in a lavish life for themselves, they might run the risk of, losing out in competition with other businesses that wisely invest a certain proportion of the surplus value produced by their employees into new, more efficient machines. And they can also invest in what Marx refers to as a superstructure, which again is a kind of insurance policy that works to support the bourgeoisie's economic and political interests and secure them, right? Uh, And so when a superstructure emerges and is built up through the course of time with the surplus value, the profit that the capitalists then invest in the superstructure, that superstructure works in complex ways to be able to secure and legitimate the political and economic interests of the ruling class or the bourgeoisie. And in the next lecture, I'm going to talk about how it is that that superstructure, in as much as it pumps out ideology, among other things, shapes the general process of social, political, and intellectual life, right, in a particular society, and by logical extension, uh, influences and conditions and shapes and by degrees determines this thing called subjectivity, right? Which is to say, consciousness. So, in sum, for Marx, the economic structure of society gives rise to a superstructure, which is to say, social, political, and legal institutions that pump out ideology, which manages to shape the consciousness of uh, the constituents or the people of a particular society in a way that works or redounds to the advantage of those who are already securely in power, which is to say, the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, or the dominant class.